And joining us now, former Obama White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs, former Republican National Committee Chairman Michael Steele, USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page, and in her first TV appearance as NBC News Washington correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor, who's also, of course, still moderator of Washington Week on PBS. We never miss that. Robert Gibbs, first to you. How does the president tackle Ukraine with the speech tomorrow? Instead of the domestic priorities, should it become the major focus? Is he the foreign policy leader? Does he pivot? What does he do?
Well, Andrew, I think he's got to walk and chew gum at the same time and likely has to talk about both of them. I tend to believe still the economy is the biggest focus in this speech. If you look at the public polling that was out this weekend, it's the economy that is the biggest challenge that he has. But I do think you can twin these together because in reality, the American people are likely to see their food prices and their energy prices go up as a result of what's happening in Ukraine and Europe. And I think this is a moment for Joe Biden to speak plainly and simply to the American people about what's at stake in Ukraine, why it matters, and why Americans are going to almost certainly have to be part of the sacrifice in order to push Putin back. And so I think it's a unique moment. It's the biggest audience he's likely to speak to this year. That's always true for a State of the Union. And I think he has to use this moment to not just talk about that, but really dig into inflation and the economy. Again, that's what's driving his disapproval rating up and his approval rating down.
And you mean domestically, he has, low poll numbers, people not having confidence in his leadership. And he has to show his empathy that he really understands the struggle that people have gone through going through COVID, but inflation.
That's right. And he is the kind of president who is focused on being an empathizer in chief. He is someone who came into office really thinking about sort of how does he connect to everyday people. But this, of course, as you said, with the sliding poll numbers, is really a test for him. Not only is this foreign policy wise one of the most important speeches by an American president since the Cold War, but he has a domestic agenda that is stalled. You think about voting rights, you think about policing rights, you think about all of the different things he wants to do, infrastructure when it comes to the Build Back Better Act. So he really has to go forward and say, I have an agenda. Here's sort of the way forward for me to get that done, on top of the fact that he has to talk about what's going on in Eastern Europe and how that's going to affect us here at home with record high inflation. So there's a tall order there. And based on my conversations with White House officials, they are revising, they are making sure that this is a speech that both speaks to the moment, meets the moment, but also is a speech that directly impacts everyday Americans' lives and can really sort of talk to them about how he sees them and how he really feels their pain in this moment.
Michael Steele, let's talk about what the president is facing, though, politically. With the midterms really not that far off, and we just saw what happened at CPAC over the weekend, where, the far right wing of the Republican Party is really going after him on every front.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, that's to be expected. I'd be surprised if they didn't. Even if it wasn't, the right-wing takeover of the GOP driving the narrative, the traditional old line GOP would be driving the narrative, to Robert's point about the economy and what Yamiche was saying about how all of this kind of fits together. So the reality for the president is he's got two roads in front of him that he's got to merge, and he's got to make that messaging very effective. The noise from the right is going to be the noise from the right. You cannot break up against that and think you're going to change that sound. That bell is going to clang no matter what. What you've got to do is create a clarion call, moving the population in a different direction. And that's why the speech is important. Don't get me wrong. But what the messaging is after the speech becomes triply important, because then you've got to take that and translate it across a country in neighborhoods and communities that weren't necessarily watching the speech last night, but did see poll numbers showing the president at 37%, do feel the pinch of high gas prices and inflation. So the speech is an important moment to set and reset. Set the narrative around global affairs, reset the narrative around the economy, and then go out into the country and deliver that message at kitchen tables and gas stations. And as the polls open for primaries, President, go stand in a line with voters and show the impact and the importance of voting in the country. So he has the opportunity to do it. The question I have, and maybe Robert can answer this, is his political team capable of doing those types of strategies?
And can he do it in a wartime setting when he's, having all of these conference calls and has to show his leadership on that and not show that he's focusing too much on politics and going out to the country? Susan, let's talk about the new USA Today Suffolk poll that shows inflation, not surprisingly, though, is a major problem for the president. 57% disapproving of the job that he has done, 44% strongly disapproving. So take us through those numbers and what it tells you.
A big challenge for the president. There's a different agenda now than you might have predicted even a month or two ago. It's not COVID. It's not how to pass the Build Back Better bill. It's how to deal with inflation. And I think also just in the past few days, there's going to be a focus on Russia and Ukraine. Big challenge for Biden. Also a big opportunity, because the most damaging single number in our poll is by 2-to-1 Americans say they do not see Joe Biden as a strong leader. And leadership on the foreign stage with an event as cataclysmic as the one we're watching now in Europe is one that could enable him to come back and change that reputation about whether he's a strong leader, Andrea.
And Robert Gibbs, your take as well, and you've got the Iowa governor. She's going to give the Republican response. How do you see tomorrow night shaping up? And also, Rashida Tlaib is going to have a response from the progressive part of the party.
Yeah, and look, this is one of those moments where, in reality, there's 535 responses that will come sometime tomorrow and tomorrow evening from Capitol Hill. But I think he's got to focus on what does this speech lay out for not just the next week or 6 days, but the next 6 months, right? This has to be a document that is looked at as a North Star for this administration in what they're going to be working on between now and Election Day. That's the big focus.
Robert Gibbs, Michael Steele, Susan Page, and NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor.
So excited to be here with you.
We're just all thrilled. The whole Bureau is. Thanks for starting out with us today.